My name is Johnathan Miller, and I'm 52 years old. I'm writing this from a safe house in rural Montana, where the windows stay covered and I don't use my real name at the general store. 3 years ago, I helped a Bigfoot escape from a classified military operation, and they've been hunting me ever since. I spent 20 years in the Army Signal Corps, monitoring communications from places most people have never heard of. I was good at my job, dedicated, the kind of soldier who volunteered for the difficult assignments. That dedication cost me my marriage, my relationship with my son Jake, and eventually, my freedom. People ask why I'm telling this now, after 3 years of running and hiding. The answer is simple. They're getting closer. I've intercepted their communications, tracked their search patterns. They know I'm in Montana, and it's only a matter of time before they narrow down my location. Jake is the only person who knows where I am. He's 28 now, and for most of his life, I was absent even when I was physically present. His mother died when he was 15, and instead of being there for him, I buried myself deeper in my work. I became a ghost in my own son's life, choosing classified operations over soccer games, choosing overseas deployments over graduation ceremonies. I told myself I was serving my country, protecting freedom, doing important work. Really, I was running from grief I didn't know how to process. In 2022, I volunteered for what I thought was a routine assignment, a communications hub in the Cascade Range, monitoring satellite signals for foreign intelligence. It was remote, it was classified, and it paid well. Perfect for someone trying to forget that his son wouldn't return his calls anymore. I had no idea what I was really signing up for. No idea that I'd end up betraying everything I'd sworn to protect. No idea that I'd meet a Bigfoot who would teach me more about being human than 20 years of military service ever did. The creature I helped escape, I called him Tarek. It means morning star in Arabic, something my wife used to call Jake when he was little. Tarek was a father too, protecting his family the only way he knew how. He was dying in that military facility, not from injuries, but from despair, from captivity, from the knowledge that he'd been hunted like an animal. I watched the military plan to cut him open, to study what made him different, to reverse engineer his biology for weapons programs. I watched him draw pictures of his family in the dirt of his cell, watched him grieve in ways that transcended species. And I made a choice, the first truly good choice I'd made in years. I threw away my career, my pension, my freedom. I violated federal law, military regulations, and every oath I'd ever taken. I became a traitor in the eyes of the government I'd served for 2 decades, but I saved a life. I kept a promise. I chose presence over duty. This is what happened in those mountains. This is what the military doesn't want you to know. This is why some secrets are worth protecting, even if it costs you everything. I wasn't always the kind of man who would betray his country for a Bigfoot. Before 2022, I was Sergeant Johnathan Miller, model soldier, reliable communicator, the guy command could count on for the impossible assignments. I wore my uniform with pride and my loneliness like a second skin. My wife, Rachel, died in 2012 after 2 years of fighting cancer that spread faster than any of us expected. Jake was 15, at that age where everything feels like the end of the world anyway. He needed his father present, stable, willing to sit with grief instead of running from it. I gave him neither. 3 months after Rachel's funeral, I took an overseas deployment, then another, then another. I convinced myself Jake needed space to heal, that my presence would only remind him of what we'd lost. The truth was simpler and uglier. I was terrified of my own son's pain because it mirrored my own. Every time Jake looked at me with those red, swollen eyes, I saw Rachel dying all over again. So I ran. The Army made running easy. There was always another assignment, another crisis, another reason to be anywhere except home. I became specialized in remote communications, the kind of work that took you to the edge of nowhere and kept you there for months. Jake went to live with Rachel's sister in Seattle. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd come back when I was ready, that he understood. He didn't call anymore by the time he turned 18. I didn't blame him. By 2022, I was 50 years old and completely alone. No wife, no son who would speak to me, no real friends outside the military. just a career and a series of anonymous hotel rooms and a growing awareness that I'd wasted the only life I'd get. When the job posting came through for the Cascade Range assignment, I jumped at it. Classified communications hub, small team, 6-month rotation, excellent pay. The posting said we'd be monitoring foreign satellite communications, tracking potential security threats, standard signal intelligence work. It felt safe, isolated, but purposeful. A way to keep serving without having to face what I'd destroyed through my own cowardice. I flew into Seattle in late March, spent one night at an airport hotel. I thought about calling Jake, who lived less than 20 miles away. I even pulled up his number on my phone, stared at it for 10 minutes. I didn't call. I told myself the assignment was classified, that I couldn't tell him where I was going anyway, that it was better to wait until I had something meaningful to say. More running, more excuses, more choosing absence over the discomfort of trying. The next morning, I caught a helicopter to the installation site. We flew over endless forest, mountains still snow-covered in early spring, terrain so remote it looked prehistoric. The pilot told me there were no roads within 30 miles of our location, no cell service, no connection to the outside world except military communications. Perfect, I thought, exactly what I needed. A place where my failures couldn't follow me, where I could focus on work and forget everything else. I had no idea I was flying toward the most important choice of my life. The installation looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Built into the side of a mountain, camouflaged so well you could fly right over it and see nothing but rock and trees. The entrance was a reinforced blast door, hidden behind what looked like a natural rockfall, accessible only by a narrow trail that disappeared in bad weather. Inside, the facility was all clean lines and humming electronics. 3 levels carved into the mountain, connected by metal staircases that echoed with every footstep. The top level housed living quarters, small rooms with military efficiency bunks and footlockers. The middle level was the command center, walls covered in screens showing data feeds and satellite imagery. The bottom level was restricted access. I learned that on my first day when I tried to explore and found locked doors with biometric scanners. Commander Patricia Hollis, the officer in charge, told me the lower level was for equipment maintenance and storage. Her tone made it clear I shouldn't ask questions. The team was small. Besides Hollis and myself, there were 3 other communications specialists, 2 security personnel who rotated shifts, and occasional visits from technicians I wasn't introduced to. Everyone was professional, quiet, the kind of military personnel who'd learned not to ask about things above their clearance level. We settled into a routine quickly. 8-hour shifts monitoring data feeds, checking equipment status, running diagnostics on the sensor array spread throughout the surrounding forest. The work was technical, but not particularly demanding. Most days, nothing happened. We watched screens, logged data, and waited for something interesting. But there were things that didn't add up. The sensor array was too sophisticated for simple communications monitoring. We had acoustic detection systems, thermal imaging, motion sensors forming a grid across 50 square miles of wilderness. This was tracking equipment, not communications gear. When I asked Hollis about it during my second week, she gave me a rehearsed answer. We were monitoring for foreign reconnaissance teams, she said, potential threats to national security who might use the remote terrain for covert operations. The sensors would detect any human presence in the forest. It made sense on the surface, but I'd worked enough intelligence operations to know what human tracking looked like. This equipment was calibrated for something different. The motion sensors were set to detect something much larger than a person, the thermal imaging tuned to spot heat signatures that didn't match human patterns. I started paying closer attention. Late night shifts were best for observation when Hollis was asleep and the security team was less attentive. I noticed patterns in the data logs, movement traces that appeared and disappeared across the sensor grid. Something was out there. Something big enough to trigger our systems, smart enough to avoid our cameras, present enough to show up on multiple sensors simultaneously. Whatever we were tracking, it was real. It was aware of us, and it was trying to stay hidden. I still thought it might be a foreign asset. Maybe a reconnaissance team with advanced camouflage. Maybe a defector hiding in the mountains. Maybe some black ops project from another agency. The possibility that we were hunting a Bigfoot never crossed my mind. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone who spends time in the Pacific Northwest hears about Bigfoot eventually. But I'd always dismissed it as folklore, tourist-trapped nonsense, the kind of thing people claim to see after too much time alone in the woods. I was about to learn how wrong I was. The anomalies started small. A sensor going offline without explanation, coming back online hours later with no sign of mechanical failure or weather damage. Data feeds showing movement patterns that didn't follow any logical route, as if whatever we were tracking understood the terrain better than our maps did. I began documenting everything in a personal log, kept encrypted on my laptop. Movement traces that appeared at dusk and disappeared by dawn. Thermal signatures that registered too hot for ambient temperature, but too cold for human body heat. Acoustic readings that picked up vocalizations, low-frequency sounds that weren't quite animal, weren't quite human. After 6 weeks at the installation, I'd accumulated enough data to see the pattern clearly. We weren't tracking multiple targets. We were tracking one, a single entity moving through the forest with purpose and intelligence. It avoided our cameras with uncanny precision, never appearing in direct line of sight. It disabled our equipment without destroying it, as if it understood the technology and wanted to blind us without triggering immediate repairs. This wasn't a foreign reconnaissance team. This wasn't a defector or a hermit or some lost hiker. This was something else entirely. Something that had learned our patterns and was actively evading us. I wasn't the only one who'd noticed. During a briefing in late May, Hollis announced that a specialist team would be joining us within the week. She didn't say what kind of specialists, didn't explain why they were needed. But the way she said it, the careful control in her voice, told me this operation was entering a new phase. The specialists arrived on a rainy Tuesday, flying in on an unmarked helicopter that didn't match any military designation I recognized. There were 4 of them, all civilians despite their military bearing. They carried equipment cases marked with corporate logos I didn't recognize, and cleared the security team out of the command center for private meetings with Hollis. I caught fragments of their conversations through the ventilation system that connected the levels. Technical terms I didn't fully understand, references to tracking protocols and capture scenarios, discussions about tranquilizer dosages and cage specifications. Cage specifications. For something they expected to capture alive. That's when I knew, whatever we were hunting, it wasn't human. The military didn't build cages for foreign assets or defectors. They built cages for animals, for creatures, for things that couldn't be contained through normal means. The realization should have excited me. This was something unprecedented, something beyond normal military operations. Instead, I felt a growing unease that I couldn't fully explain. Maybe it was the way the specialists talked, clinical and detached, discussing their target like a problem to solve rather than a living being. Maybe it was the way Hollis had started referring to it as the specimen rather than the target. Or maybe it was something deeper, some instinct left over from when humans were prey instead of predators. A warning that we were hunting something that deserved better than what we planned to do to it. I started spending more time monitoring the sensors, less time sleeping. I wanted to see it, whatever it was. I wanted to know what we were really dealing with before the specialists started their capture operation. I didn't have to wait long. Late night shifts were mine by choice. The other communication specialists preferred daylight hours, but I'd always been comfortable in darkness. It reminded me of deployment, of sitting in communications tents, listening to encrypted chatter from operations happening in time zones I couldn't see. It was a Thursday in early June when I decided to investigate a disabled relay station. The sensor had gone offline around midnight, the 3rd time that week. Protocol said to wait until morning and send a security team. But I was restless, tired of watching screens, tired of piecing together patterns from data instead of seeing things directly. I geared up quietly, told the security guard I was doing a perimeter check, and headed out into the forest with a flashlight and a toolkit. The relay station was only half a mile from the installation, an easy hike on a trail that maintenance teams had worn into the mountainside. The night was clear and surprisingly warm. Stars visible between the tree branches, the kind of vast sky you only get far from cities. I could hear the forest around me, branches creaking, small animals moving through undergrowth, the distant sound of water running over rocks. The relay station was a metal box attached to a tree, solar panels above it, cables running down into the ground. I found it quickly enough, but stopped when my flashlight illuminated what had been done to it. The box was open, carefully, deliberately. The solar panels had been disconnected and laid on the ground, undamaged. The internal components had been removed and arranged in a pattern around the base of the tree, each piece placed with what looked like intention. This wasn't vandalism. This wasn't weather damage or animal interference. Someone or something had methodically disassembled our equipment and left it displayed like an art installation. I knelt down, examining the arrangement. The components formed a circular pattern, largest pieces on the outside, smallest in the center. It reminded me of something Rachel used to do with Jake when he was little, arranging his toy cars in patterns on the living room floor. Communication. This was communication. Whatever had done this wanted us to know it understood what our equipment did, wanted us to see that it could take apart our technology without destroying it. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, that prey animal instinct, the one that tells you when you're being watched. I stood slowly, turned in a circle with my flashlight, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just shadows and branches and the endless quiet of the forest at night. But I knew. I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't alone, that something was out there in the darkness, watching me the way I'd been watching it through sensors and cameras for 6 weeks. I spoke into the silence, feeling foolish even as I did it. I know you're there. I'm not going to hurt you. No response, just the sound of my own breathing and the hammering of my heart. Then I saw it, at the very edge of my flashlight's reach, a shape, massive and dark, standing between 2 trees maybe 40 feet away, too tall to be a bear, too broad to be human. The Bigfoot stood motionless, watching me with what I swear was curiosity rather than aggression. We stared at each other for what might have been seconds or minutes. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but look at this creature that wasn't supposed to exist. The Bigfoot's eyes reflected my flashlight, not like animal eyeshine, but with a quality that seemed more aware, more present. Those eyes held intelligence, I was certain of it. Not the blank stare of a wild animal, but the focused attention of something that understood exactly what it was looking at. I should have been terrified. Every instinct should have told me to run, to get back to the installation, to report what I'd seen. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, as if I was looking at something familiar, despite its impossible strangeness. The Bigfoot tilted its head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost human. Then it took one step backward, moving with surprising grace for something so massive, and disappeared into the shadows. I heard branches moving, footsteps that faded quickly into the general noise of the forest. I stood there for another 10 minutes, flashlight pointed at the space where the Bigfoot had been, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. This was real. Not folklore, not tourist trap nonsense, not mice-identified bears or shadows. This was a living, breathing creature that existed in the same mountains where the military had built a secret installation to hunt it. I gathered up the disassembled relay components and put them back in the box, my hands shaking slightly. I couldn't repair the station properly without tools I didn't have, but I could make it look like I'd tried. I couldn't report what I'd actually seen, not yet, not until I understood what reporting would mean for the Bigfoot. Walking back to the installation, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to tell anyone what I'd witnessed, not Hollis, not the specialists, not the security team. This was my secret, my knowledge, and I needed to figure out what to do with it. The rest of that shift passed in a blur. I sat at my terminal, pretending to work, actually thinking about those eyes, about the deliberate way the Bigfoot had arranged our equipment, about the fact that it had let me see it, had chosen to reveal itself rather than staying hidden. Why would it do that? Why risk exposure when it had been successfully evading our sensors for weeks? Unless it wanted me to see, unless it was trying to communicate something I wasn't smart enough to understand yet. By morning, I'd convinced myself that the capture operation was wrong. Whatever the Bigfoot was, it deserved better than to be tranquilized and caged and studied. It had intelligence, awareness, maybe even consciousness in a way we'd never imagined possible in a non-human creature. The military would never see it that way. To them, the Bigfoot was a specimen, a biological curiosity, a potential source of knowledge that could advance weapons programs or medical research. They would capture it, they would study it, and they would never consider whether they had the right to do any of that. I had maybe days before the capture operation began. Days to figure out how to protect a creature I'd only seen once, a Bigfoot that had no idea it had accidentally found the only person in the installation who might be willing to help it. I thought about Jake, about all the times I'd chosen the easy path over the right path, chosen absence over difficulty. This time, I could choose differently. This time, I could be present for someone who needed help, even if that someone wasn't human. The operation happened faster than I expected. 3 days after my encounter with the Bigfoot, the specialists activated their capture protocol. I watched it unfold through the command center displays, helpless and horrified in equal measure. They'd set up a perimeter in a narrow canyon, using the terrain to limit the Bigfoot's escape routes. Sonic weapons I didn't know we had, devices that emitted frequencies designed to cause disorientation and nausea. The Bigfoot stumbled into the trap sometime around dawn, probably following its usual movement pattern, unaware that we'd predicted its route. I watched the thermal imaging feeds as the Bigfoot tried to escape. It moved erratically, clearly affected by the sonic weapons, stumbling and falling and trying to climb out of the canyon. The specialists closed in with tranquilizer guns, firing multiple darts until the Bigfoot finally collapsed. The worst part was the sounds. The audio feed picked up vocalizations that the Bigfoot made while it was being cornered, sounds that were unmistakably distressed. Not roars or growls like an animal, but something closer to human expressions of fear and pain. It sounded like Jake at Rachel's funeral, those deep, wrenching sobs that had terrified me because I didn't know how to comfort them. The memory hit me so hard I had to step away from my terminal, had to leave the command center before anyone saw me losing my composure. I stood outside the facility entrance, breathing cold mountain air, trying to push down the growing certainty that I was complicit in something deeply wrong. I was military. I'd spent 20 years following orders and trusting that the chain of command knew what it was doing. But this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to justify later. By mid-morning, they brought the Bigfoot in. I watched from the upper level as the security team used a reinforced transport cage, the kind designed for moving dangerous animals. The Bigfoot was unconscious, massive body limp, being moved with machinery because it was too heavy for human strength alone. They took it down to the restricted lower level, the area I'd never been authorized to enter. But I didn't need access to know what was down there. I'd seen enough in my 20 years to recognize a holding facility when I saw one being constructed. The installation fell into organized chaos. Hollis coordinating with the specialists, additional personnel flying in on helicopters, equipment being moved to the lower level in sealed containers. Everyone had a purpose, everyone knew their role in whatever came next. Everyone except me. I sat at my terminal during my shifts, monitoring communications that suddenly seemed meaningless, watching data feeds that didn't matter anymore. The real action was happening below me, in rooms I couldn't access, to a creature I'd only seen once but couldn't stop thinking about. That night, I made another decision. I was going to find a way to access the lower level. I was going to see what they were doing to the Bigfoot. And if it was as bad as I suspected, I was going to figure out how to stop it. I didn't know yet that stopping it would mean throwing away everything I'd built over 20 years. I didn't know that helping the Bigfoot would turn me into a fugitive, a traitor, someone who'd spend the rest of his life running from the government he'd served. But I think, on some level, I knew I'd already made the choice. The moment I decided not to report seeing the Bigfoot in the forest, I'd chosen a side. Everything else was just details. Getting access to the lower level took 2 weeks of careful preparation. I needed security codes, biometric data, and most importantly, I needed to establish a pattern of working late shifts when fewer people were around. I started volunteering for overnight monitoring, becoming the reliable guy who'd cover for others who wanted regular hours. I also started mapping the facility's security systems, using my communications expertise to understand where the cameras were, what the blind spots were, and how the access logs worked. The military trains you well for exactly this kind of technical work. even if they never intend for you to use it against them. Late one night in July, I finally accessed the lower level. I'd created a false maintenance alert that required checking some wiring near the restricted stairwell, giving me a legitimate reason to be near the biometric scanner. I'd also copied security codes from an encrypted file I wasn't supposed to have access to, using backdoor protocols I'd learned during signal intelligence training. The door opened with a soft click. I descended the stairs quietly, every sense alert for sounds of security patrols or personnel working late. The lower level was cooler than the rest of the facility, the air heavy with the smell of disinfectant and something else, something animal and distressed. The holding area was at the end of a corridor, behind reinforced glass walls that looked like they belonged in a zoo. Inside, the Bigfoot sat in the corner of a space maybe 20 feet square, concrete floor, no furnishings except a drain in the center. The Bigfoot looked smaller than I remembered, though that might have been the effect of captivity. It sat with its back against the wall, massive shoulders hunched, head down. The posture was unmistakably defeated, the body language of something that had given up. I approached the glass slowly. The Bigfoot didn't look up, didn't acknowledge my presence. I could see details I'd missed during our brief encounter in the forest. The hair covering its body was dark but not uniform, lighter on the chest and palms. The hands were enormous but shaped like human hands, with opposable thumbs and what looked like deliberate calluses. This close, the Bigfoot looked even more like a person than an animal. The proportions were wrong for human, the features were different, but the fundamental structure was similar enough to be deeply unsettling. This wasn't a bear or an ape or any known primate. This was something else, something that existed in a space between human and animal that science insisted couldn't exist. I stood at the glass for maybe 10 minutes, just watching, trying to understand what I was seeing. The Bigfoot's breathing was slow and steady, but there was something wrong about it. A quality of resignation that reminded me of my father in the hospital during his final days, that sense of someone who's decided to stop fighting. The Bigfoot was dying, I realized, not from injuries or illness, but from captivity itself, from being trapped, from being isolated, from losing whatever freedom meant to a creature that had spent its entire life hidden in the wilderness. I thought about Jake again, about how he'd shut down after Rachel died, how he'd stopped eating properly and stopped talking, and spent days in his room doing nothing. I'd left him because I didn't know how to help, because watching him suffer reminded me too much of my own grief. I wasn't going to leave the Bigfoot the same way. Not this time. I tapped gently on the glass. The Bigfoot's head moved slightly, acknowledging the sound but not looking up. I tapped again, and this time it turned its head, those intelligent eyes meeting mine through the reinforced barrier. Recognition passed between us. The Bigfoot remembered me from the forest. I was certain of it. I started visiting the lower level every night I worked late shift. I'd slip down during the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, when security was most relaxed and personnel were focused on monitoring equipment rather than internal movement. I brought food, usually protein bars or fruit from the facility kitchen, though I had no idea if the Bigfoot would eat it. At first, the Bigfoot ignored everything I brought. It would sit in its corner, unmoving, breathing that slow, defeated rhythm that scared me more than aggression would have. I'd sit outside the glass barrier and talk softly, not expecting understanding, but needing to offer something besides silence and isolation. I told the Bigfoot about Rachel, about how she'd died and how I'd failed Jake by running instead of staying. I told it about the guilt I carried, about all the moments I'd missed, about becoming a ghost in my own son's life. The Bigfoot would watch me sometimes while I talked, those eyes focused with an intensity that felt like listening. By the third week of visits, something changed. I arrived one night to find the protein bar I'd left the night before had been eaten, the wrapper carefully folded and placed near the glass. Small gesture, but significant. The Bigfoot was choosing to engage, choosing to accept what I offered. I started bringing water too, in bottles I'd leave near the access slot used for feeding. The Bigfoot would wait until I'd stepped back before approaching, moving slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether this was a trick. It would drink the water in long gulps, clearly dehydrated despite whatever the facility staff was providing. Communication, developed slowly. I'd make simple gestures. The Bigfoot would watch and sometimes respond. I'd point to myself and say my name, Johnathan, over and over. The Bigfoot couldn't replicate human speech, but it made sounds that seemed like attempts at acknowledgement. I named it Tarek, speaking the name aloud during one of my visits. It was what Rachel used to call Jake when he was little, Morning Star in Arabic, a term of endearment from her heritage. The Bigfoot responded to the name, or maybe just responded to the consistent sound of it. One night, I brought paper and a pencil. I drew simple pictures through the glass, showing what I meant. A stick figure for person, a square for building, wavy lines for water. Tarek watched intently, then moved to the glass and gestured at the paper. I pushed it through the access slot. Tarek took it carefully, examined the pencil with those massive fingers, and started drawing. The movements were awkward at first, adjusting grip and pressure, but quickly became more controlled. What Tarek drew changed everything. Not random lines or meaningless shapes, but actual representational images. Other figures like itself, smaller ones that might be children, all surrounded by mountains and trees. A family group, clearly depicted despite the crude execution. Tarek drew more, the figures spreading out, moving through forest, some disappearing off the edge of the paper. Then just a few figures, then fewer, until finally just one figure alone, isolated in the center of the page. I understood immediately. This was Tarek's history, the story of its people disappearing, dying, being hunted, until only scattered survivors remained. And Tarek was showing me this deliberately, wanting me to understand what the military was destroying. I looked at Tarek through the glass, this massive creature that could probably tear me apart but had chosen instead to share its grief through drawings. The Bigfoot wasn't an animal, wasn't a specimen, wasn't a biological curiosity. It was a person, as much as any human, capable of thought and memory and the kind of loss that transcends species. 2 days after Tarek's drawings, I found a way to access the classified files about the operation. It required using security clearances I wasn't supposed to have, routing through encrypted servers in ways that would definitely be detected eventually, but I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what the military really wanted with the Bigfoot. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The files went back decades, references to similar creatures documented across the Pacific Northwest, the Rockies, even reports from Alaska and Canada. The military had known about Bigfoot populations for at least 60 years, tracked them through various means, but never successfully captured one alive until now. The documents explained why they wanted Tarek. It wasn't just about proving the species existed, it wasn't about scientific curiosity or zoological classification. The military wanted to understand the Bigfoot biology, wanted to reverse engineer the traits that made them unique. Regenerative capabilities, the files said. Tissue samples from deceased specimens showed healing properties beyond anything seen in known mammals. Wounds that should have been fatal showed signs of advanced cellular repair. The military wanted to understand how, wanted to replicate it for battlefield medicine and super soldier programs. Cognitive enhancement was another focus. Brain tissue analysis suggested neural structures that might explain enhanced memory, spatial awareness, and problem-solving abilities. The files referenced classified research into using Bigfoot DNA to develop cognitive enhancement drugs for military personnel. There were other things too, technical details I only partially understood about genetic markers that didn't match known primate species, about cellular structures that suggested evolutionary paths science hadn't predicted. The Bigfoot weren't just an undiscovered species. They were something that challenged fundamental assumptions about human evolution and biological development. But the worst part was the experimentation timeline. The files detailed planned procedures for Tarek, starting with non-invasive studies and escalating to increasingly invasive methods, tissue samples, spinal fluid extraction, neural mapping that required drilling into the skull. The language was clinical, detached, treating Tarek like a laboratory animal rather than an intelligent being. The phrase, acceptable loss of specimen, appeared multiple times. They expected Tarek to die during the research process. They'd planned for it, budgeted for it, discussed what additional specimens they'd need to capture to continue the program after Tarek was gone. I sat at my terminal reading these files, feeling sick. This was what I'd been supporting, what I'd been helping by monitoring sensors and tracking movement patterns. I'd been complicit in hunting an intelligent being, so the military could cut it apart for weapons research. That night, I visited Tarek earlier than usual, not caring if my irregular schedule attracted attention. I brought the papers I'd printed, the classified files I wasn't supposed to have. I couldn't show them to Tarek directly. The Bigfoot couldn't read English, but I could explain. I sat at the glass and told Tarek what they were planning. I used simple words and drew pictures, showing what procedures meant, what the timeline looked like. Tarek watched intently, understanding more than I expected, those intelligent eyes growing darker as it processed what I was showing. When I finished, Tarek moved close to the glass and placed one massive hand against it. I put my hand up on the opposite side, separated by reinforced barrier but connected by understanding. Two beings, both trapped by circumstances beyond their control, both grieving for losses that couldn't be fixed. I made a promise in that moment, speaking it aloud so Tarek could hear the commitment in my voice, even if it couldn't understand the words. I'm going to get you out of here. I don't know how yet, but I'm not going to let them do this to you. The phone call from Jake came 3 days later, during my off shift while I was lying in my bunk trying to sleep. The facility had satellite phone access for emergencies, and Jake's name appearing on the caller ID was enough of a surprise that I answered immediately. Dad? His voice sounded strained, distant, like we were talking across more than just physical miles. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. Jake? I sat up, suddenly alert. What's wrong? Are you okay? Nothing's wrong, he said, but there was something in his tone that suggested otherwise. I don't know. I was thinking about Mom's birthday coming up, and I thought I should call. We haven't talked in 6 months. Rachel's birthday. I'd forgotten completely, too wrapped up in the situation with Tarek to remember dates that used to matter. The guilt hit me immediately, familiar and heavy. I'm sorry, I said, inadequate as always. I should have called. I should have remembered. Yeah, Jake's voice had an edge now, anger bleeding through. You should have done a lot of things, but you're on another assignment instead, another classified operation that's more important than being here. We fell into our usual pattern, him attacking, me defending, both of us unable to break the cycle of hurt we'd built over years. Jake wanted to know why I'd taken another remote posting, why I couldn't just get a normal job and be accessible for once. I tried to explain that the work was important, that I couldn't discuss details, that it would be over in a few months. Mom needed you, Jake's voice broke slightly, the anger cracking to show the pain underneath. When she was dying, she needed you there, and you showed up for like 2 weeks before you took that deployment to Germany. And I needed you after she died, and you sent me to live with Aunt Sarah instead. I know, I couldn't argue because he was right. I know I failed you both. I was trying to protect you from my own grief. Protect me? Jake laughed, bitter and hurt. You abandoned me, Dad. You chose your career and your grief over being my father. And you're still doing it, still taking assignments that keep you away from anything that requires you to actually be present. The conversation lasted another 20 minutes, cycling through old arguments and fresh pain. By the end, Jake was crying, and I was sitting on my bunk with my head in my hands, realizing that I'd destroyed the most important relationship in my life through repeated choices to run instead of stay. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about Tarek downstairs in that cage, imprisoned by my military's desire to exploit its biology. I thought about Jake in Seattle, imprisoned by my failure to be the father he deserved. Two beings suffering because of human selfishness and inability to value connection over control. I'd told Tarek I would help it escape, but how could I do that when I couldn't even figure out how to escape my own patterns of failure? How could I save anyone when I'd proven repeatedly that I chose the easy path over the right path every single time? Then I thought about something Rachel used to say, that being a good person wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about what you did after you realized you'd been wrong. It was about choosing differently the next time, even when choosing differently was harder than staying the same. I could choose differently now, with Tarek, with Jake, with the rest of whatever life I had left. I could stop running, stop hiding behind duty and protocol, stop pretending that absence was protection. I could be present, finally, for someone who needed me. Even if that someone was a Bigfoot imprisoned by my government, even if being present meant throwing away everything I'd built. Planning the escape took 3 days of careful preparation. I couldn't just open Tarek's cage and walk out of the facility. We were miles from anywhere, surrounded by wilderness that Tarek knew better than I did, but that would be actively hostile to me. I needed supplies, I needed to create a distraction, and most importantly, I needed to disable the tracking and communication systems that would let them hunt us down. My signal corps training became an asset in ways the military never intended. I understood the facility's communications architecture intimately, knew which systems were redundant and which were critical, knew how to create cascading failures that would look like technical malfunctions rather than sabotage. I started by creating false data feeds from the sensor network. Nothing obvious, just subtle glitches that would make the monitoring systems unreliable. I corrupted backup files, introduced errors in the automated logging systems, made it harder for anyone to track what was actually happening in real time. The security cameras were trickier. I couldn't disable them outright without triggering alarms, but I could create loops, recorded footage that would play instead of live feeds. It required accessing the video server physically, swapping out memory cards during a maintenance window I fabricated through false error reports. I gathered supplies over several nights, taking small amounts from the equipment storage and the kitchen so nothing would be immediately missed. Water bottles, energy bars, a medical kit, a map of the area, a compass. I packed everything in a bag I could carry easily, hiding it in a maintenance closet near the restricted stairwell. The hardest part was getting Tarek ready. During my visits, I tried to communicate what was going to happen, drawing pictures of us leaving the facility, moving through the forest, getting away from the soldiers. Tarek understood the concept of escape. I could see it in the way the Bigfoot's posture changed, becoming more alert, more focused. I also had to make peace with what this meant for my life. Helping Tarek escape meant betraying my oath, violating federal law, becoming a fugitive. I'd lose my pension, my military record, probably face court-martial and prison time if they caught me. Everything I'd worked for over 20 years would be gone. But when I thought about the alternative, about watching them cut Tarek apart in the name of weapons research, about knowing I could have helped but chose career and comfort instead, the choice was obvious. I'd spent 13 years choosing wrong with Jake. I could choose right this time with Tarek. The night of the escape, I worked the late shift as usual. The facility was quiet, most personnel sleeping, only one security guard on duty, and he was used to my presence by now. I'd become part of the background, the communications specialist who liked working odd hours. At 0200 hours, I activated the first phase, a fabricated grid-wide sensor malfunction that would require Commander Hollis's attention and pull her to the command center. False reports of movement across multiple sectors, thermal signatures that didn't make sense, audio feeds picking up interference. While Hollis and the security team were focused on the sensor problem, I headed to the lower level with my stolen access codes. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my hands were steady. This was the most important thing I'd ever done, and I couldn't afford to hesitate. Tarek was waiting at the glass when I arrived, as if the Bigfoot had known this was coming. Those intelligent eyes met mine, and I saw understanding there, awareness that everything was about to change. I used the security override to open the cage door. The locks disengaged with a series of clicks that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet corridor. "Let's go," I said softly. "We don't have much time." Tarek moved out of the cage cautiously, massive body filling the corridor, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Up close, the Bigfoot was even more imposing than I'd realized, easily 8 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to block the entire hallway. But there was no aggression in Tarek's movements, just careful awareness. The Bigfoot followed me toward the maintenance tunnels I'd mapped out, moving quietly despite its size, clearly experienced its stealth. The maintenance tunnels ran through the mountain beside the main facility corridors, used for routing cables and ventilation. They were cramped and poorly lit, but they bypassed the security checkpoints and most of the camera coverage. I'd memorized the route during my weeks of planning, knew exactly how to navigate from the lower level to the emergency exit on the far side of the installation. We moved through darkness, broken only by my flashlight, Tarek's breathing steady behind me. Twice we had to stop and wait while I listened for sounds of pursuit, for any indication that someone had noticed the escape. But the facility remained quiet, everyone focused on the false sensor data I'd created. The emergency exit was sealed but not locked from the inside, designed for evacuation rather than security. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the slight squeal of hinges that hadn't been used in months. Cold mountain air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and rock and freedom. Outside, the forest was dark and vast. Stars overhead, no moon, the kind of darkness that was absolute and consuming, perfect for disappearing, for becoming invisible in the wilderness that Tarek knew intimately. But we weren't clear yet. The exit was maybe half a mile from the main entrance, close enough that sound would carry, close enough that pursuit would find us quickly once the alarm was raised. We needed distance, and we needed it fast. "Go," I said to Tarek, gesturing toward the deep forest. "Get away from here. I'll hold them off as long as I can." But Tarek didn't move. The Bigfoot looked at me, then looked at the forest, then back at me. The message was clear even without words. Tarek wasn't leaving without me. "I can't keep up with you," I argued, knowing it was true. "I'm not built for this terrain. You'll move faster alone." Tarek made a sound, low and insistent. Then the Bigfoot did something I didn't expect. It reached down and picked me up, lifting me like I weighed nothing, cradling me against its chest with arms that were gentle despite their strength. I wanted to protest, wanted to argue that this would slow Tarek down, that carrying a full-grown man through the wilderness was impossible. But we didn't have time for debate. Behind us, I could hear alarms starting to sound in the facility, voices shouting, the beginnings of organized pursuit. Tarek started running. Not the lumbering gait I'd expected, but smooth, powerful strides that covered ground, faster than I could have managed in a vehicle on these slopes. The Bigfoot moved through the forest like it was part of it, avoiding obstacles I couldn't even see, finding paths that didn't exist for human eyes. I held on, arms wrapped around Tarek's neck, feeling the rhythm of breathing and movement, the raw power of a being that belonged to this wilderness in ways humans never would. We crashed through undergrowth, leaped over fallen logs, scrambled up slopes that would have required climbing gear for me alone. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Voices, flashlights, the mechanical noise of all-terrain vehicles starting up. They'd discovered the escape faster than I'd hoped, mobilized their response faster than I'd planned for. But Tarek didn't slow down. The Bigfoot carried me deeper into the mountains, away from the facility, away from the life I'd known, toward something uncertain and terrifying and strangely right. For the first time in 13 years, I'd chosen to be present for someone who needed me. Even if that someone was a Bigfoot fleeing through the darkness, even if that choice meant destroying everything I'd built, I'd finally chosen right. We ran through the night, Tarek carrying me with tireless strength while I directed us generally east, away from the facility and toward the deepest wilderness. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit faded gradually as we put distance between ourselves and the installation, but I knew they wouldn't give up easily. By dawn, we'd covered maybe 10 miles of rough terrain. Tarek finally set me down near a stream, breathing heavily but not exhausted. I collapsed onto a fallen log, my body aching from being carried, my mind racing with the reality of what we'd done. The facility would have called in reinforcements by now. Helicopters would be searching by daylight, tracking teams with dogs, probably satellite surveillance being diverted to find us. I'd sabotaged their systems, but military redundancy meant they'd restore capabilities faster than I wanted to believe. We needed to keep moving, but I needed to rest first. My body, softened by months of desk work, wasn't prepared for this kind of exertion. I drank from my water bottle and ate an energy bar, offering one to Tarek. The Bigfoot accepted it, eating quickly, those intelligent eyes scanning the forest around us for threats. Over the next 3 days, we developed a pattern. Tarek would carry me during the difficult terrain, set me down during easier stretches where I could walk. The Bigfoot showed me things I never would have noticed: edible plants hidden among the undergrowth, water sources that didn't appear on my maps, animal trails that provided easier routes through dense forest. This was Tarek's world, and I was just a guest being guided through it with patience I didn't deserve. When I struggled up slopes, Tarek would wait without complaint. When I needed to rest, the Bigfoot would sit nearby, watching the forest with senses far more acute than mine. At night, we'd find shelter under rock overhangs or in thick stands of trees. I'd share my rations with Tarek, though the Bigfoot clearly didn't need them, able to find food in the forest that I couldn't identify. We'd sit together in the darkness, and I'd talk quietly about Jake, about Rachel, about all the ways I'd failed as a father. Tarek would listen, or seem to listen. Sometimes the Bigfoot would draw in the dirt with a stick, creating pictures that told its own story. Other Bigfoots spread across the mountains, a community that had scattered when the military started hunting them. Tarek had stayed behind, drawing the soldiers away from the others, sacrificing freedom so the rest could escape. A parent protecting children, I realized, exactly what I should have done for Jake instead of running to another deployment. The parallel was obvious and painful. On the third day, we heard helicopters. The sound came from the west, multiple aircraft working a search pattern. Tarek pulled me under dense tree cover, and we stayed motionless while the helicopters passed overhead, their rotors deafeningly loud. They were getting closer, tightening the search radius. We couldn't run forever, and eventually they'd find us. I was slowing Tarek down, making escape impossible through my own physical limitations. That night, I tried to convince Tarek to leave me behind. We were close to truly remote wilderness now, areas where the Bigfoot could disappear and never be found. I could surrender, face whatever consequences came, but Tarek could survive. The Bigfoot refused. Tarek drew in the dirt again, showing two figures together, then crossing out the image of them separated. We'd started this together, the message seemed to say, and we'd finish it together. I thought about Jake again, about our last conversation, about his accusation that I always chose the easy path. Surrendering would be the easy path now, removing myself from Tarek's burden, going back to face court-martial and imprisonment. Staying was harder. Continuing to flee, continuing to be present despite my weakness, continuing to let someone else help me instead of isolating myself in false self-sufficiency. This time, I chose the harder path. I chose to stay. On the fourth day, we reached a boundary I recognized from my maps. Beyond this point was designated wilderness, hundreds of square miles with no roads, no permanent human habitation, no infrastructure the military could easily use for pursuit. If Tarek could get into that wilderness, the Bigfoot would have a real chance of disappearing permanently. But I couldn't go any further. My body was giving out, feet blistered and bleeding, legs shaking from exhaustion, lungs burning with every breath. I'd pushed myself harder than I had in 20 years, but I was 50 years old and soft from desk work. I had nothing left. We stopped at the wilderness boundary, a ridge overlooking endless forest stretching toward mountain peaks still snow-covered in summer. Beautiful and vast and completely indifferent to human concerns. Perfect refuge for a Bigfoot trying to survive. I sat down heavily on a rock, pulling out the last of my water. Tarek stood beside me, looking out at the wilderness, and I could see the yearning in the Bigfoot's posture. Home, safety, everything Tarek had been running toward. "You have to go alone from here," I said, knowing Tarek couldn't understand the words, but hoping the tone conveyed the meaning. "I'll only slow you down. I'll get you caught." Tarek looked at me, then back at the wilderness. The Bigfoot seemed to be wrestling with something, making a decision that clearly caused internal conflict. Then Tarek knelt beside me and started drawing in the dirt. The pictures came quickly, with more detail than I'd seen before. Tarek drew me, then drew Jake, based on the photograph I'd shown during our weeks in the facility. The Bigfoot drew us separated, then drew us together, then drew a symbol I'd learned meant healing or mending. "Go back," Tarek seemed to be saying. "Fix what you broke. Be present for your son." Tears stung my eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. This creature, this Bigfoot I'd helped escape, was telling me to repair my relationship with Jake. Tarek was teaching me the same lesson Atlas had taught Dr. Sarah Chen in that story I'd heard once, that presence matters more than anything, that some connections are worth fighting for. But how could I go back? I'd violated federal law, betrayed my military oath, helped a classified subject escape. I'd be arrested immediately, face court-martial, probably spend the rest of my life in prison. Tarek drew more, showing me separated from Jake with bars between us, than showing us together despite the bars. The message was clear. Prison didn't matter as much as attempting to repair the relationship. Physical presence mattered less than emotional presence. I could still be Jake's father even if I was locked up, as long as I tried. The Bigfoot reached into a crevice in the rock beside us and pulled out something I hadn't seen it carrying. A stone, carved with impossible detail, despite Tarek's massive fingers. The carving showed a father and son, two human figures standing together, rendered with care and precision that spoke of hours of work. Tarek must have made it during our nights in the forest, working quietly while I slept. A gift, a reminder, a physical representation of what mattered most. Tarek pressed the stone into my hands, then the Bigfoot touched my chest over my heart, made a sound that I'd learned meant understanding or acknowledgement, and stood up. We looked at each other for a long moment, human and Bigfoot, two beings who shouldn't have been able to connect but had found common ground in shared loss and the desire to protect what mattered. "I'm sorry they hunted you," I said. "I'm sorry humans can't leave well enough alone. I'm sorry for everything my species did to yours." Tarek tilted its head in that almost human gesture I'd seen before. Then the Bigfoot turned and walked into the wilderness, moving with that fluid grace that made it seem to disappear, even as I watched. Within moments, Tarek was gone, swallowed by forest and shadow, vanishing as completely as if the Bigfoot had never existed. I sat on that ridge for another hour, holding the carved stone, thinking about everything that had happened. 4 days ago, I'd been Sergeant Johnathan Miller, military communications specialist, following orders and living a half-life of isolation and guilt. Now I was a fugitive who'd thrown away his career to save a Bigfoot. The choice should have felt catastrophic. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in years. I started hiking back toward civilization, moving slowly, no longer running. They'd find me eventually, I knew that. But I had time to prepare, time to think about what I'd say to Jake before the military arrested me. It took 3 days to reach a ranger station, 3 days of walking through forest that seemed emptier without Tarek's presence. I'd gotten used to having the Bigfoot nearby, the sound of breathing, the knowledge that I wasn't completely alone. Now the solitude felt heavy, familiar in ways I didn't like. The rangers at the station were shocked to see me. They'd heard about a missing military contractor. Search teams had been through the area days earlier. They called the authorities immediately, and I didn't resist. I sat quietly while they made their calls, holding the carved stone in my pocket, thinking about Jake. The military police arrived within hours. They weren't rough, weren't aggressive, just professional and disappointed. They cuffed me, read me my rights, loaded me into a vehicle for transport. Commander Hollis was there, her face carefully neutral, but I could see the anger and betrayal in her eyes. "Where is it?" she asked once we were alone in the transport vehicle. "Where's the specimen?" "Gone," I said simply. "Deep wilderness. You'll never find it. We'll keep looking. We have resources you can't imagine." "I know, but Tarek knows those mountains better than any human ever will. And now that the Bigfoot knows what you're capable of, knows what you plan to do, Tarek will be even more careful about staying hidden." Hollis studied me for a long moment. "You threw away 20 years for an animal, for something that isn't even human. Was it worth it?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "It was worth it. Tarek is as intelligent as you or me, probably more so in ways we don't understand. And even if it wasn't, even if it was just an animal, what you planned to do was wrong. You know it was wrong." She didn't respond, just looked out the window at the passing forest. Maybe she agreed, maybe she didn't. It didn't matter anymore. They held me at a military detention facility while they decided what charges to file. Treason, espionage, violation of security protocols, theft of classified materials, destruction of government property. The list was extensive and creative. My military lawyer told me I was looking at decades in federal prison, possibly life. I called Jake from the detention facility using my one allowed phone call. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious when he heard my name. Dad? Where are you? There are military police asking questions, saying you're in trouble. I'm in detention, I said. I did something they consider a crime. I'm probably going to prison for a long time. Silence on the line then. What did you do? I helped someone escape. Someone who needed help, who was going to be hurt. I can't tell you more than that. Was it worth it? Jake asked, echoing Hollis's question. Was it worth throwing everything away? Yes, I said, and meant it completely. It was worth it. And Jake, I need to tell you something. I'm sorry. For everything. For not being there after your mom died. For choosing work over being your father. For running every time things got hard. I heard him breathing on the line, processing. Why are you telling me this now? Because I might not get another chance. Because a friend taught me that presence matters more than anything. That some connections are worth fighting for. I can't fix the past, but maybe I can try to be better going forward, even if I'm doing it from prison. The trial happened fast. Military efficiency applied to processing a traitor. I pled guilty to most charges, didn't fight the system I'd violated. My lawyer argued for leniency, emphasized my 20 years of service, suggested psychological evaluation to explain my actions. I refused to cooperate with that defense. I wasn't insane, wasn't having a breakdown. I'd made a conscious choice to help a Bigfoot escape, and I stood by that choice completely. The prosecution wanted life in prison. My lawyer negotiated it down to 15 years with possibility of parole after 8. I'd be 60 when I got out if I served minimum time, 67 if they made me serve the full sentence. Jake came to the sentencing, the first time I'd seen him in person in 3 years. He sat in the courtroom gallery, watching as the judge handed down my sentence, as the military formally stripped my rank and discharged me dishonorably. After sentencing, they gave us 10 minutes to talk before transporting me to the federal penitentiary. We sat in a small room with a guard by the door, neither of us sure how to start. Jake spoke first. Mom would have been proud of you. She always said you were a good person who just got lost for a while. I'm not sure helping a Bigfoot escape is what she had in mind. No, Jake smiled slightly, but standing up for something you believed in, choosing to help someone who needed it even when it cost you everything, that's exactly what she would have wanted you to do. We talked for the remaining minutes, tentatively rebuilding a connection that had been broken for too long. Jake promised to visit, to write, to be present in whatever limited way prison allowed. I promised to do better, to be the father he deserved even from behind bars. When the guard said time was up, Jake hugged me, a real hug, not the awkward obligatory embraces we'd managed at holidays before Rachel died. This was connection, real and honest, the kind I'd been too afraid to attempt for years. I'll see you next month, Jake said. We have a lot of time to make up for. 3 years have passed since that sentencing. I'm sitting in a federal penitentiary in Montana, writing this account on paper I've saved from the prison library. Jake visits once a month like he promised, sometimes bringing his girlfriend, talking about his life in ways he never did before my imprisonment. Our relationship isn't perfect, probably never will be, but it's real, it's honest, and it's present in ways it never was when I was free and hiding behind work. Turns out Tarek was right. Physical bars don't prevent connection if you're willing to try. I don't know what happened to Tarek after our goodbye on that ridge. I like to think the Bigfoot found its people, that they're still out there in the deep wilderness, hidden and safe. Sometimes I imagine Tarek teaching younger Bigfoot about humans, about how to stay hidden, about how one soldier chose to help instead of hurt. The military never found Tarek. I know because they questioned me repeatedly during the first year, trying to get me to reveal where the Bigfoot went, what direction it traveled, any information that might help. Them resume the hunt. I told them nothing, and eventually, they stopped asking. Commander Hollis retired a year after my trial, the failed capture operation apparently damaging her career trajectory. The installation in the Cascades was shut down, though I'm sure they relocated their Bigfoot hunting program somewhere else. The military doesn't give up easily on potential weapons applications. I monitor news about Bigfoot sightings when I can access newspapers in the prison library. There are always reports, always people claiming to have seen something in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Most are probably misidentifications or hoaxes, but some might be real. Some might be Tarek or others like it, still surviving, still hidden, still free. I have 8 years left on my sentence if I maintain good behavior. 8 years of prison food and scheduled recreation and limited contact with the outside world. Some might say I'm suffering for my choice, that I'm paying too high a price for helping a Bigfoot escape. I disagree. Every day in here is worth it for the knowledge that I finally chose right, that I was present for someone who needed help, that I valued connection over career. Tarek taught me what Dr. Sarah Chen learned in her cave all those years ago, that civilization isn't measured by technology or military power, but by capacity for compassion. That some beings deserve protection more than they deserve study. That presence, real and honest and uncomfortable, matters more than anything. Jake brought something unexpected during his visit last month. A newspaper clipping, carefully preserved, about a conservation effort in the Cascade Range. A coalition of environmental groups had successfully lobbied for expanded wilderness protection in the exact area where the military installation had been located. The article mentioned unusual provisions in the protection agreement: no scientific research allowed without explicit federal approval, no commercial development of any kind, minimal human access, with most of the area designated as restricted wilderness, where even hiking required special permits. "Someone in the government knows," Jake said quietly, showing me the clipping. "Someone high enough to influence policy is protecting that area deliberately." I studied the article, thinking about Tarek, about the other Bigfoot that might still be hidden in those mountains. Someone in the chain of command had seen the classified files, understood what the military had been hunting, and decided protection was better than exploitation. "Maybe Hollis," I suggested. "She saw what they planned to do to Tarek. Maybe it changed her mind about the program." "Or maybe," Jake said, "there are more people like you than you think. People who believe some things are worth protecting rather than studying." The idea gave me hope. Not just for Tarek, but for the future, for the possibility that humans might eventually learn to value mystery over mastery, preservation over possession. I've been thinking about what I'll do when I get out in 8 years. I'm 60 now. Will be 68 when I'm released. Not young, but not dead either. Still time to do something meaningful with whatever life I have left. I want to work in conservation, use whatever skills I have left to protect wilderness areas where Bigfoot might still hide. I can't undo the damage the military did, can't bring back the Bigfoot that were hunted before Tarek, but I can help ensure the survivors have space to exist in peace. Jake has promised to help. He's talking about going back to school for environmental science, about making his career about protection rather than exploitation. My son, choosing presence and purpose over the easier paths available to him. I tell him he doesn't need to change his whole life because of my mistakes, but he insists this is his choice, not mine. He wants to continue what I started, wants to be a guardian for creatures most people think are myths. We're building something together, father and son, a partnership based on shared values rather than obligation. It's not the relationship I imagined when Jake was born, but it's real and honest and more meaningful than anything I managed before Tarek. Sometimes I dream about that ridge where we said goodbye. I see Tarek watching from the tree line, those intelligent eyes observing as I work on conservation projects, as I fight to protect wilderness areas, as I try to be worthy of the trust the Bigfoot placed in me. In the dreams, Tarek nods, that almost human gesture of approval, then disappears back into the forest, safe, hidden, free. I don't know if the dreams mean anything, if they're wish fulfillment or something deeper, but they comfort me, remind me why I'm here, why I chose this path despite the cost. The other inmates ask sometimes why I'm here, what crime landed me in federal prison. I tell them I helped someone escape, that I chose to protect someone vulnerable rather than following orders. Most don't push for details, respecting the privacy that prison culture demands. One inmate, an older man serving time for environmental activism, seemed to understand more than the others. He approached me in the yard last year, asked quietly if what I'd protected was still out there. "I think so," I told him. "I hope so." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. Some things are worth protecting, even if it costs you everything, especially if it costs you everything." We've become friends in the limited way prison allows. He teaches me about conservation law, about the politics of wilderness protection, about how to navigate the systems that will determine what happens to public lands. He's preparing me for the work I'll do when I'm released, giving me tools I'll need to continue protecting Tarek's territory. Today is Monday, December 8th, 2025. 3 years into my sentence, 5 years since I helped Tarek escape. I'm writing this final entry because Jake asked me to, because he wants a complete record of what happened, why it mattered, and what we're going to do about it. The military is still looking for Bigfoot. I know because Jake monitors their activities, tracking budget allocations and personnel movements, watching for signs they've resumed the hunting program. They've scaled it back, become more covert, but they haven't stopped. There have been 3 reported close encounters in the past 2 years, all in wilderness areas far from the original installation. 1 in Alaska, 1 in northern Canada, 1 in the Cascades again. Each time the military deployed teams, each time they came back empty-handed. Jake thinks they're getting closer. He thinks the Bigfoot are running out of places to hide. The technology is advancing faster than the creatures can adapt. Satellite surveillance, advanced tracking algorithms, drones that can cover vast areas quickly. The military has resources and patience and a belief that anything unknown should be captured and studied. The Bigfoot have wilderness and instinct and a desperation to survive that humans can't quite understand. It's not a fair fight. It never was. That's why Jake and I are planning for after my release. We're going to become guardians, not just for the area where Tarek disappeared, but for every wilderness where Bigfoot might still hide. We're going to work with conservation groups, with sympathetic government officials, with anyone who believes some beings deserve protection more than discovery. It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's what we can do. 2 people trying to honor a debt I owe to a Bigfoot who taught me how to be human. I think about Tarek every day, about those intelligent eyes watching me in the forest, about the patience shown while I struggled to keep up during our escape, about the carved stone sitting in Jake's apartment in Seattle because prisoners aren't allowed personal possessions. I think about the military's plans, about what they would have done if I hadn't helped Tarek escape. The vivisection, the tissue samples, the acceptable loss of specimen, the complete lack of consideration for consciousness that didn't match human expectations. I think about Dr. Sarah Chen's story, about Atlas dying in that cave while teaching her lessons about presence and connection, about how she kept her promise for 30 years, protecting the burial site, choosing secrecy over scientific recognition. I'm following her example. This account I'm writing, it will stay sealed until I'm gone. Jake has promised to keep it safe, to only share it if sharing helps protect the Bigfoot in ways we can't accomplish while I'm alive. Maybe decades from now, maybe never. Some secrets protect more than they conceal. Some mysteries deserve to stay mysterious. Some beings, whether they're the last of their kind or part of a surviving population, deserve our respect more than our curiosity. The military will keep hunting. Technology will keep advancing. The wilderness will keep shrinking. Eventually, probably sooner than anyone wants to admit, there will be nowhere left for Bigfoot to hide. But until then, Jake and I will keep fighting. We'll protect what we can, preserve what wilderness remains, honor the choice Tarek made to trust a human who should have been an enemy. I was a terrible father for most of Jake's life. I failed Rachel by running when she needed me most. I spent 20 years in the military, following orders, doing my duty, never questioning whether duty was the same as right. Then I met a Bigfoot in a cage, dying from captivity and despair, and I finally understood what mattered. Not career, not duty, not following orders, but presence, connection, the willingness to stand up for someone who needs help, even when helping costs you everything. Tarek saved me as much as I saved it. The Bigfoot taught me lessons about being human that 20 years of military service never did. About choosing compassion over convenience, about protecting the vulnerable rather than exploiting them, about being present for the people who need you, even when presence is painful. The guards are calling lights out in 5 minutes. I need to finish this, seal it up, give it to Jake during his next visit. This is the complete record of what happened in those mountains, why it mattered, and what the military doesn't want anyone to know. They wanted Tarek for weapons research, for cognitive enhancement, for healing properties they could reverse engineer and exploit. They saw a biological resource, a specimen, an opportunity to advance military medicine and soldier performance. I saw a person. Different species, different appearance, different way of existing in the world. But a person nonetheless, with thoughts and feelings and a family to protect. With intelligence and compassion and the capacity to teach a broken human how to live better. That's the truth they're afraid of. Not that Bigfoot exists, though that would be significant enough, but that Bigfoot is intelligent, conscious, capable of complex thought and emotional depth, that there's another form of personhood in these mountains, one that has deliberately avoided contact with humanity, because humanity destroys everything it touches. If people knew that, if scientists confirmed it, if the government acknowledged it, then everything would change. You can't hunt and cage and vivisect a person, not legally, not ethically. The military's entire program would be exposed as something between human rights violation and genocide. So they keep it classified. They keep hunting quietly, keep denying publicly, keep ensuring that any evidence of Bigfoot intelligence gets buried under layers of security clearance. But I know, Jake knows. A few others scattered through the government know. And we're going to keep fighting to protect what remains, to preserve wilderness where Bigfoot can still survive, to honor the beings who've hidden so successfully for so long. This is my confession and my commitment. I helped a Bigfoot escape from a military operation because it was the right thing to do, because I'd spent too many years choosing wrong, because Tarek deserved better than what they planned. I'm in prison because of that choice. My career's destroyed, my military record dishonorably discharged, my freedom gone for 8 more years. Some people think I'm crazy, think I threw away my life for an animal that might not even be real. But Jake believes me. The carved stone Tarek made proves it happened. And every time Jake visits, every time we talk about the conservation work we'll do together, every time I see the respect in my son's eyes instead of the anger that used to be there, I know I made the right choice. Tarek is out there somewhere, I have to believe that. Hidden in wilderness so remote that satellites can't penetrate the canopy, living with others of its kind, teaching the next generation how to avoid humans and their endless hunger for control. And I'm in here, paying the price for helping, but at peace in ways I never was during my 20 years of military service. Because I finally understand what Rachel tried to teach me, what Jake needed from me, what Tarek showed me through patience and trust. Presence matters more than anything. Connection is worth fighting for. And some beings, human or otherwise, deserve protection more than they deserve study. That's the lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. That's what I'll teach anyone who asks why I threw away my career for a Bigfoot. Because Tarek wasn't just a Bigfoot. Tarek was a person, a parent, a teacher, and a friend. And you don't abandon your friends, not even when abandoning them would be easier. You show up, you stay present, you honor your promises, even if it costs you everything, especially if it costs you everything. The lights are going out now. This account is finished. Jake will keep it safe, share it when the time is right, use it to help protect what remains. To anyone reading this in the future, know that Bigfoot is real, is intelligent, and deserves to survive without human interference. Know that there are people fighting to protect them, working quietly to preserve the wilderness they need, and know that some secrets are kept not to hide truth, but to protect the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. That's why I did what I did. That's why I'd do it again, even knowing the cost. Because some choices define who you are. And I chose to be the kind of person who protects rather than betrays, who helps rather than hurts, who finally, after 50 years, learned to be present when it mattered most. Tarek taught me that. A Bigfoot in a cage taught me how to be human, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring that lesson.